All right, can we start? Cool. Hi, everyone. Sorry for being late. I had a thing this morning that I had to do. Cool. So does anyone remember where we stopped last time? Okay. Cool. So does anyone remember what we were making?
Doing the food app, and I remember I think we got stuck.
Yeah.
At a certain point.
Yeah. Where did we get stuck?
The API, like we were doing it in the front end.
We were trying to call the Yelp API, and it wasn't allowing us to make it from the front end. Okay, cool. So the browser was preventing the request to Yelp. So we decided that we would make a server which is running on a different port, and then we would make the call here, and then have the front end talk to the back end from that call. Okay, so quick recap. We essentially just creating a basic server. There's a port running on 3000. We have this file which has this call to make to Yelp on the client folder. So we created a new folder called server. Remember, we had a folder called client with all of our stuff in it. So what we're going to do is just move this Yelp API file into the server folder. Just drag and drop it into this. And now in here, what we're going to do in our index.js in our server is we're going to require the Yelp API. So we're going to say const Yelp API is equal to require yeah, you're going to do this. And then we are going to start our server. So let's see. Scale workshops. So in our package JSON, let's create a new task, a new script here called start server, which will be nodemon source server index.js.
What did you just add to me?
So I added a new script in my package JSON file. Do you want to turn the lights off?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Dev.
You can see now? Or that one too?
Sure.
Make it all dark. Okay. So is everyone with me so far?
No.
So, okay. So what I just did was I added this line number 9 here, which is a way to start our backend server. So we're using nodemon to start our server. And I don't know if nodemon is in here, so we may have to install it as a dependency.
Can you also go back to index.js?
Yeah. I just required the Yelp API file, just so that it loads. Say that again, we're not using Webpack?
For the server? Yes.
No, because there is no, yeah, this is all ES5 right now, so we wouldn't need Webpack, or Babel in this case.
In fact, the dev server actually makes that, something like that.
Right. So we're using Webpack on the client side. So that would continue to be the same. So we're using Webpack dev server to start our client server, but we want to start another server for a backend server. So we now have two servers. So we have a start. So maybe we can change this to start client just so that it becomes more explicit of what we're starting. And then we can say start client and start server.
Let's say, can you use concurrently and then you could run
Yeah, we can do that too. Yeah. Okay, so let's also run npm install nodemon. So while that's happening, let's see what's going to happen. So we essentially are going to start our server, which is going to evaluate this file. And because this file requires Yelp API, it's going to evaluate whatever is in Yelp API. And in Yelp API, we're making a call to this route. And then hopefully we're going to see some console log happen after some time, after this request completes. So this is just like a test to see if our Yelp stuff is hooked up and whether this will actually work or not. Because we were doing the same thing from the front end and it wasn't working, if you remember. That was the issue that we were having. Actually, I wonder if there's like if I can put a method is get, and isn't there a mode for CORS is no CORS or something in fetch API? Fetch API. That's so fetch. Nice. So request mode. Oh, mode is no cars. Okay. Mode is no cars. So I wonder if this would have actually worked on the client side as well. Maybe we didn't need a server after all. But either way, I think it's a good thing that we're doing this. So let's actually copy this and put it in here too, just to test to see if it still works. Okay. So I put it back in the client folder as well, just to do this test. So now we have Yelp API both in the client folder as well as the server folder. The same file. So if you command C and command V, it'll copy it into the other folder too.
Is the secret key being used?
Doesn't feel like it is. Yeah, because I think Yelp changed it.
Yeah.
Remember last week they made an announcement that from March 1st or something, they would like drop the client ID and the secret key, and they would just use the API key. So that's what we're doing. Hi, Stephanie. Okay, so let's try to start. Let's do an npm start. Npm run start client. Cannot find source index. Where is that happening? So Is everyone getting that error?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Cool. So what is that error? What's happening? So where are we requiring source index? Is that in our client and in our package JSON? So I think Webpack dev, remember we created a folder called client? I don't think the folder client existed before. So now it's trying to find source index, but it should technically find source client index.
That happened.
Yeah, so maybe Webpack dev server. Let's look at the documentation for Webpack dev server and see if it accepts a file that it can if we can specify a path for it to start the server. I think it probably does, because that would be super lame if it doesn't. Okay, so that's the start script. Options, there are some options. Yeah. Dev server, so configuration. Oh, that I guess is the Webpack config. Oh, I see. So that's in the Webpack config. So here you go. The source client index. So everyone go to the Webpack config and change that to source client index instead of source index. So Stephanie, we did like a couple of things. We went to our package JSON and we
In the Webpack, it's not directly in the client because in the client we have 3 other folders.
say that again.
The index.js file.
Which JS file?
Index.
It's the top level.
It's just the entry. So you have to specify a file, which file that you want it to start. So the entry point would be source client index.js. What's the error? What's the error that you're getting?
Not resolved file or the module not found.
Client component. You pointing at that in your entry?
So your entry should only have source client index.js.
And then index, yeah. And you go into the index. Components.
Okay, let me do this one thing. Let me commit whatever I have, and whoever joined late can just start from there. Yeah. So git status.
Oh, because we moved the Yelp API to the source folder, and the path in app.js for the Yelp API needs to be updated.
Oops.
That's what it looks like.
So it says import Yelp API.
Which file?
Oh, sorry. In components.app.js. Source client.
Wherever that is at, it's not. It's not.
We moved it.
It's
So
not-
how does it look like import the Yelp API from?
So you need to go back again, 2 more dots,
It's in reducers.
and then go to server.
We should have a Yelp
Right there. And that should fix
Oh,
that.
yeah. But we could put directly.
Okay, now you got some syntax checks there.
GitHub so you can do a git pull?
No, she fixed it. Now it's just now it's just
Now different.
no different error. Yeah.
That one is not
All right, so this is the where do I put it?
If we just did a git pull, wouldn't it update?
I created a new repo.
Oh,
Yeah. Because like the last one was for the different ones. It was a to-do list, remember?
oh, I have Yelp restaurant.
Really? Where did I create it? Was it in, if you look at the remote, git config, so if you look at,
Git dash B.
if you just say cat.git/config, like if you run that command, cat.git/config. Mm-hmm.
You want me to look for the origin?
Yeah, what is the remote origin, the URL? What is it pointing to?
Oh, I'm just kidding. It was Stephen Bragg.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
But he called it the exact same thing, Yelp restaurant.
So this is the URL. So github.com/guildcraft/Yelp-restaurant-picker. Wow.
Immutable dependencies. That's new.
jQuery.
Wow. Wow.
That's cool. That GitHub's doing this.
Let's keep jQuery.
It's an old version of jQuery, so it probably has security holes. Okay. So Mira, your issue is fixed? Awesome. So now let's go to localhost 8080. Oh yeah, so npm start run start client. Return to 401. 401 usually means what? Unauthorized. No! We don't have permissions to make this request. So let's see. What the? Google Maps API. Yeah. So request headers. Oh, how come it didn't send, oh yeah, it didn't send across our header for our authentication. So if you go to the client Yelp API, this isn't being sent across. If you look at our request headers. So the Yelp essentially says that in order to make a request to them, you have to specify a header called authorization, which should contain the API key in it. But for some reason, that's not happening, right? Like a request didn't contain that header in here. So something is going wrong. So we kind of want to see how to make the fetch request. So let's look at the fetch API again. Let's look at headers. So this is a way to pass in headers, which is just an object. So I thought that's what I was doing. So we have an object which has another key called headers, which is another object. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, let's do this. Fetch slash So I'm just going to make a random request here to see if my understanding of headers is okay. Cool. So it had a header called foobar.
Are you doing start client or start server?
Start client. Yeah. So oops. Okay, so the header is Bing. So for some reason, um, okay, so let's look at the documentation for the Yelp API. So search. Okay. Introduction. Set the authorization HTTP header with the value as bearer API key. Got it. And remember there was a Yelp node JS thing, that package that we were using, but then that was only for JavaScript for the backend. And essentially it was doing okay, let's try doing this on the back end to see if that changes anything. So you can, so let's create another tab here and then do an npm run start server. Oh yeah, so this would not be export anymore. So this is our Yelp API file inside of our server folder. Yeah, so let's get rid of the exports in there. So let's open the file yelp api.js and delete the export const.
This fetch is not defined.
Yeah, that'll probably be true. Fetch is not defined. So we need to download isomorphic fetch.
Or you could use Axios.
Or use Axios. So we npm install Axios. Yeah. So let's do an npm install Axios. How do we pass in headers here? Oh yeah, here. Okay, I guess it's the same way because it's just an object here. And then it's...
Yeah, basically like that.
Okay, cool. So everyone installed Axios?
Taking a couple seconds.
Okay. Once you do that, let's go back in here and replace fetch with axios.get. And let's require Axios as require Axios. And then we don't need to provide this method get as an argument, because, I mean, as an option, because you're calling axios.get. And then this mode also kind of goes away. What's that?
I was talking.
Okay.
And then if you want to like see the result, it's going to be under result.tw.
Got it. Yeah, it's an axios.get. We're using a different library. So let's start the server. So I'm getting a 401 again. So probably means that our authorization isn't working. So maybe my API key is not correct. That's a possibility. So manage app. So Patrick, your authorization header was exactly like this. Better space that.
Yeah. I didn't use axios.get. I just used axios and pasted or put in like a header. So maybe the axios.get method can take headers like that. I'm not sure.
When we need a return, isn't that what that end up on?
There's no catch here. So if there's a catch here, then it would be fine.
Did you get anything back in the result?
What's that?
Did you get anything back in the result in your console?
No, because the error was triggered.
I'm getting a result, like a restaurant.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe my API key.
The code works.
Yeah, so maybe my API key was wrong for all along. So what API key do you have? You created, everyone created and their own API key? Okay. So so I'm still getting a 401. Interesting. Oh, what was your code?
I just did that so I could export the into the file.
Got it. Oh, I actually got something right. So weird. Wait. No, I got a 401. Okay. So maybe something is up with my API key. So maybe delete app. What is this called? What's that? So I'm just like recreating my API key. Maybe that would work. Okay. Oh, dang it. I didn't copy the whole thing. I didn't realize that you can scroll in here.
That doesn't let you like.
It doesn't let you see the whole thing. That explains it. Maybe everyone was probably falling with the same problem. Cool. What's happening?
You try your old code.
This one?
Yeah, that.
Oh yeah, because he's defining it and he's not calling it yet. Huh? I don't know, maybe. Cool. That worked.
I just sent it to you.
This worked. No, this works now. So you just have to like,
Oh, this is the API key.
yeah, the API key was incorrect. I wonder if my front end also is the same problem. Let me try to see. The front end didn't work? Okay. I wonder we can use axios.get here. Oh shit. Axios.get. And then do the same thing as import yeah, no access control origin. So maybe here CORS. There's no cars here, huh? Okay, that's fine. A good thing we did the backend thing then. Okay, so is everyone here now?
No. So, can you,
Excuse me.
I didn't import Yelp Fusion things gone.
Yeah, we don't need to use that library.
This is the server side, right?
This is a server file. So you can think of this as like some sort of a interface to talk to Yelp. We want to create this interface. Yeah.
Are both your server and client files the same now?
No, we're just going to delete the client file.
So we're taking out the node as well as
Yeah. The no cars thing was only for fetch. It's not an Axios thing. So let's delete the client file, Yelp API, and then also delete, I think in our reducers we were requiring it somewhere, or maybe it was in our components. In our components app.js, we were requiring Yelp API. Let's get rid of that as well. Yeah. How are you doing, Kelsey?
I'm totally screwed up.
What's happening?
I accidentally I deleted the wrong file.
Okay, so the other file is very similar. So, okay. Yeah, delete the one which is in the client folder, not the one in the server folder. Yeah, the one which has the exports in them.
Oh, we leave the exports on now?
No, we get rid of the exports.
I don't know the secret key, but we don't need that, right?
We don't need that. So we can get rid of the client ID as well, get rid of the secret key. We just need the API key. And ideally, we want to put this API key in like some sort of a config. So
And the server that's running is just the server. Yeah. Are we running the client server or the? I'm sorry, the start client or start server or both?
what was your question?
Which server are we using? Both.
We're going to use both. One is for the front end and one is for the back end.
This result data is amazing.
What's that?
The result data, the console log.
Yeah, it gives you back like a list of like I think 100 restaurants or something. So what we can do is result.data dot businesses dot, let's say count. This is to that. Or dot length actually, not count. Bad. Cool. So we get back 20 actually. Okay, not too bad. This gives us 20. Cool. So everyone with me so far?
So I'm no longer getting the 401 response, but I'm not getting anything in my console. Which in Chrome.
Oh yeah, it won't be in Chrome. It should be in your other one. Okay, so maybe try adding a catch here. Let's all add a catch.
Sorry, no, it's my bad. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so the intention of creating this file is to now have some sort of an interface. So think of like the Node package, the Yelp API package. Like it just creates like an easy way for you to make calls to Yelp, right? You don't have to think about like the authentication stuff. You don't have to think about like what the URL is. It just exposes like different functions like search, maybe find a specific restaurant, or like, these different like functions which are useful. So you don't have to like know about what are the inner workings of Yelp. So you're creating like this usually the technical term is an interface or a contract between two entities. So in our case, like the entity is like the front end wants some information from Yelp, and we want to get back like restaurants. So the front end only cares about restaurants. It doesn't care how it gets the restaurants. So we are hiding the details of how it's getting it behind the interface. So this is called like we're creating an abstraction in some way. So what we want is, let's see how we want to use our, so the first thing to do when we create an abstraction, so we want to like create an abstraction to get data from Yelp. That's our intention from the Yelp API. So the first thing to think about is like, how would I want to use my abstraction? So I want to like, let's say I want to say Yelp. This is like, called wishful thinking. In programming, we're always doing wishful thinking where we are assuming that something is going to work. We don't have the working details of it. We're just trying to look at how we would use it, assuming that it all exists. So we would say Yelp API dot search, and I would give it like some sort of a restaurant, like maybe some options. So maybe I would say name of the restaurant, or maybe search string. Right, so I'm just making things up here. I don't even know if this is the right thing to do, but I'm just like making it up to see what so location maybe. So it could be like Oakland or something. Maybe latitude and longitude. So maybe coordinates. I don't know if like Yelp even like takes these. So your coordinates maybe like lat, some 1, 2, 3. LNG is blah blah blah. Right, and then I would get back a promise. So I would say var. So I could do a .10 on it. So this is the restaurant's promise. Then I can say restaurant's promise .then. I get back restaurants, and then I do something with the restaurants. Right? I can console log the restaurants. So this is how I want my API to work. I only need to care about the interesting things, which are like, what is my search string? What is the location? What are the coordinates? Right? Like from a user of this API, I don't really want to care about what is the actual URL, what are the headers that I have to use. Like those are like the implementation details of how I'm actually making the request. And I want that hidden away from the client of this API. And that's called like creating an abstraction, because you're creating like a way of working with the API without like leaking the details of how the API is actually, like how the call is actually being made to Yelp API. So how would I do this? Yeah, Patrick.
You could turn this into a function that like returns axios.get.
Okay.
For its arguments, it can take like, search term and location, and you can just pass those into the URL.
So how did you figure that out that that's what you need to do?
Just because like where in the URL where it says term equals and location equals, depending on what you set the term and location, it's going to return a different result. So basically, you can just take a function that can take any two arguments
So you're describing like your way of doing it, but I'm saying looking at this, these 3 lines here, like that's how I want to use my API. So I have to essentially look at how I'm using my API and backtrack and say, okay, since this API has a function called search, so I need to define some function called search. And then that function search takes an argument, which is an object. And this object has these different properties. So that's how I'm sort of thinking about my function, even without knowing what the function even does, but I do know enough information about how the function is being used. And based on that, I can backtrack and actually build my function out, even without actually knowing what the function would do. So the first thing to do would be to say, okay, Yelp API. So for the other thing, I would say like, what is Yelp API, right? So I would have to do something like import Yelp API from Yelp API, right? So that's what Yelp API is here. So if I know that Yelp API is something that I'm getting from, actually this is a file, right? So let's call it Yelp. So if I know that this is a file, and I know that I'm calling a function on that file, that means that Yelp API has to export an object. Right? The fact that I can call a .search on it means that this is an object. So that means my final file has to return some sort of an object. So I can say export default. And I can just like export an object here. So I can say, so I know that search needs to be a function. That's it. Right now, my API only contains search because that's the only function that I'm using here. That's my visual thinking. That's the only thing I need right now. I'm only going to like create things that I need right now. Is this making sense? Like you can feel free to ask questions. If it doesn't make sense, I can like repeat it.
So basically what you're doing is looking at that and saying, how can I use it in a way that abstracts all the other stuff that the user doesn't have to know about?
Right. So I'm going to create my perfect way of how I would use it, even without having the implementation at all. This is just like, I'm just thinking of it from the user's, the client's perspective. What is the client of my library? You're being a library designer here. So you're saying, how would the users of my library actually use my library? So I'm going to be like, this is how they would use it. They would have to import my library on line 22, and then they would have to instantiate, like, call the function that they want to use. And then these are the arguments they would pass in, which are like optional arguments. And then somehow my function should do its thing and return like the businesses that match these parameters. That's wishful thinking. That's how I want my function to behave. Now I'm backtracking from there and saying, okay, given that this is how I want my API to be, so you're creating an idea. Like now you're sort of materializing the idea. First, this is just an idea that this is what it should be like. Then you're sort of working backwards from that idea and creating the actual function. So on line like 16 to 18, I know that my library, which is this file, the Yelp API, right? This file is called Yelp API.js. So this is the file that folks are going to import. So that means that since they're going to import this and they're going to call search on it, that means that it has to export an object which has a key called search, which is a function. Is everyone getting that?
Yeah.
I've just backtracked it by saying that, oh, because this has a search here, I know that this has to return a search. I don't know what this function would do, but I know that the function should contain search in it. And then I know that this function takes an argument, which is an object. So I would say that this would be options. Everyone with me so far? So because I know that, now I have to use these options to somehow make my Yelp request. So now I then tie my function to how did I make a Yelp request? So, oh yeah, I need like this URL, I need like all these things. So now this is the implementation details. But all of this is now hidden away from the user of my Yelp API. Make sense? So, okay, so what do we do here? So as Patrick was saying, we want to like return a promise. So we want to return our axios.get. So our location, so our search term was restaurants and our location was Oakland. So I guess maybe we need something called a term. So we didn't have a term in here. So that's easy. Just add a term in here, right? This is, again, wishful thinking. You can just do whatever you want. So we just say, okay, now this option needs a new thing called term. And then, so I guess I was using search string. So instead of search string, we will just use term. So I don't need a search string. So term will be what? So this can now be, we can use string interpolation. And this can be replaced with option start term. And location can be replaced with option start location. Right, because I'm going to pass in options, and then options is going to contain a term and a location. So I'm just going to replace that with the values which come in from the options object. Is that making sense? So now we have sort of made this more generic. And then I somehow want to use my coordinates, but let's not worry about it now because I don't know how to use coordinates so far.
It's an object.
What's that? Coordinates is an object?
At console log the data again, and they've got coordinates, but they also have location. Location comes back as an object.
Got it. But can you search by coordinates? Can you say that I want to find restaurants around this coordinate?
I don't know. It looks like you can search by distance.
Because you can, like, at least on the Yelp app, you can search by current location, right? So I would imagine there's a way to.
Current location, you can say I want to find something.
Right, right. But then you need to somehow pass in your current location to Yelp. How do you do that?
I don't know.
Let's see. Location. If either latitude or longitude is not provided, required if either latitude or longitude is not provided. Okay, so we can provide latitude and longitude as arguments to as our parameters. So I think there's like a library to like make query parameters, which is really nice. You can just pass in an object, and if the object is like, so like you can say something like, it would be nice to have a function called make query, which takes in like an object like term equal to Oakland, location, actually term equal to restaurants, location equal to, San Francisco, and then latitude, latitude is actually this, and this should like essentially return a string with term equal to restaurants, location equal to San Francisco, and latitude equal to something like that, or whatever this value is. Right, it would be nice to have this function. So that way I could just like, instead of like explicitly putting it this way, like this, I could just like call make query of whatever options that I get, and then just pass that as attach it to here. This will potentially be like an interview coding problem. Like, how do you write this function make query, which does it? How do we do this?
Oh, you're asking.
Yeah.
Is this string interpolated?
String interpolate what? I'm saying, how do we write this function make query? Yeah, we can string and interpolate it, but we need to be, it's not like you're always going to have these 4 options. This is just a generic function called make query. It just takes any object and returns like the corresponding query parameters. Like makes a query parameter string out of the object. All right, so let's try to do this together. Even though this is a React talk, but like it's fun to do this thing. So first thing to think about when you're like writing these kind of functions is to see what is your input and what is your output. So can you tell me what my input is and what my output is? So essentially what we're trying to see is the type definition of our function, right? So make query. So this is usually like how type definitions are written. So like this is like a syntax for it. So we want to say it's an object, and then it returns a string. So it takes an object, returns a string. So that would give us some information about what our return value should be. So we can start by saying it has to return a string. So we know the return object is a string. Okay. And then our input is an object. So we can say it's an object. Correct? Okay. So what do we do now?
When we destruct the object, we pull those values.
Destructure the object? But the object could have like 100 keys in it. So how it could be anything, right? Right now it's term, location, or latitude, but it could be something else. So we want to iterate over the keys and values of the object. So how do we do that? For, I don't know, is for key in object. Okay, then what do we do? So we know we want to return a string. So what are we doing here? We're building a string with a question mark. Okay, so our result equal to empty string. And then what? So we want to return result. So we want to concatenate it with what?
Result equal result plus and then
okay, so result plus equal to what?
Question mark.
Question mark.
And then take that key which is equal to term.
So you want to do string interpolation. Key equal to
term. We want to get the key.
But
we don't. Do we know what keys will be now?
No. But we know, but that is the key is the key. So how do we get the value of a key from an object? So object dot key. But in this case, can we do a dot here? Square bracket. Okay. Object of key. Cool. So would this work?
We need to put that
And
ampersand.
Ampersand where?
Probably after that object key and then ampersand.
After the key here? And how many question marks do we have?
Thousands.
No, I think it's only one, right?
But you're adding it every single time.
No, then let's separate it.
Separate what?
Put it in another.
So put in the result in the beginning?
Would you put the whole beginning of the string? Like the HTTPS API.yelp?
No, this is just like, which is the function is this. It just returns the query parameters. So would this work?
You need when you start the for
Oh yeah. Will this work now? Let's see. Make query. Actually, I'm just going to call this. Okay. Oh yeah, this is x module dot exports. Then you want to console.log this. All right, so what do we get? We got term equal to restaurants, location equal to sand. There's no plus here, for example. We wanted a plus. And then latitude is that, and then we have an extra and in the end. Okay, some edge cases. So how do we fix the, let's do the first one, which is how do we fix the space to have pluses in here?
Use widgets and replace all spaces with plus.
Yeah.
But how to do that?
So we can use string dot as a replace function, right? So we can say so object of key dot replace. We want to replace all spaces with, will this work? Replace is not a function. So replace character in string JavaScript. Oh, got it. So slash space. Dot replace. So it says, but I got an error saying is not a function. So oh yeah, because this one is not a string. Where did it go? Okay.
Would you just do key instead of object?
Where? We want to replace the value.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess we would want to even do it for the key. But let's not worry about that for now. So what is it? How do we do this? We take slash replace. Okay, got it. So we can say with plus. That didn't work.
Should you put like S maybe for a space?
Oh yeah, that's true. Is it slash S like that? Or slash S? Okay, so JavaScript regex.
You're not doing anything with the string.
Oh, that's right. We're not doing anything.
Then not passing on.
Good catch. Okay, so that worked. I wonder if just the space also works. Yeah, okay. Probably this is better. Okay, so that fixed the first problem, but we still have this extra and in here. Yeah.
Is that an issue though? Like in the URL, if I did like a get to that and I just had an and at the end.
Yeah.
With the Yelp API care, the extra and. So maybe
Probably not, but it's just nicer to like not. To be correct. Yeah. Okay, I mean, okay, for now, I guess this would work. Let's like get back into it. But that's essentially how you would like do an algorithm, which is like, you can do that too. Just chop like the last character off.
And that would be on line 10 where it's key.
Yeah, like at the end of this, you would just say result. Is there a chop function in JavaScript? Keep forgetting. JavaScript. Chop last char.
Wait, so Can't you just drop it on line 10?
No, we want to do it at the end, only for the last one.
Right, but look at the very, you're saying key is STR.
This one?
Yeah.
No, but we need the ands,
Oh,
right? We need the ands for the other ones. Like we need it here, we need it here,
okay.
but we only don't need it for this one
Okay.
because that's like an extra.
Maybe when we are returning, just one more operation to.
Yeah, I guess you can do slice, but unfortunately slice is a slow function, but yeah, that's fine. So let's say we just return result.slice of 0, -1. Okay, cool. That worked?
Slice is slow.
Yeah, because you kind of have to go through the whole string. But it's fine. It's like your string is not going to be more than like 100 characters long, so it's not terribly slow. Okay, so what we can do now is we can say something cool, which is like let query string be make query of our options. Also, another thing that we could potentially do is that I want to essentially say if my latitude, let's say longitude, is empty, I don't want to add it in as my query string. And say I want to omit it. So we can say, we can do some cool things to say if str is equal to an empty string or str I guess if, but if it's null, then I want to say, oh, sorry, object of key. So if it's null, then it wouldn't do this. Because what will happen if, let's say, actually before doing that, if it's null, right? And let's like comment this out. And if we didn't have this, what would happen? Cannot replace of null. So then we want to check to see if object.key is actually a thing. So if object of key, so that's a shortcut you can do to say if it's and so what is this doing here? I did something cool.
Shortcut.
Yeah, but what is actually happening?
So if there's not, it won't even.
So that if this is a truthy value, only then do this thing on the right. If this is a falsy value, then just like it short circuits and stops there. So it doesn't even evaluate this. So the error that we were getting was it was trying to call replace on a null. So if you want to prevent the right-hand side thing from happening, you can just put an and in here. So that will just like trigger the short circuit there, and then stir will remain to be null. So now we can say, okay, if stir is an empty string or if stir is null, only then we add, I guess if it's not, only then we want to do that. Oh, it's like, and, only then we want to add the result.
If you like another shortcut, just do like if string, because if it's an empty string or null, then it would.
But empty string is truthy.
I thought empty string was falsy.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Empty array and empty object.
Oh, JavaScript. So I guess, oh, it's falsy.
Yeah, but when you put the bang in front of it, it's going to be true.
Oh yeah, it is falsy.
This the other day because it's different in Python, but empty string is falsy, but like empty array is truthy and empty object is truthy. It's
Right.
just string that's falsy.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Screw you, dude.
Where's JavaScript actually?
Oh, screw you, JavaScript.
Okay, so JavaScript strings are empty strings are truthy, falsy. Okay, so
You can just do range string.
yeah. Okay. Oh, I got rid of. Okay. Cool. So it got rid of longitude because longitude was null. So you can also check that to see if empty string is null. And yeah, and that didn't work either. Good. Okay. That was a detour that we took. Quick detour. Cool. So now we have a way to create our query string. So what do we do with our query string once we have it?
Nothing.
So do we want to make use of it?
Yeah, we pass it to the Axios get.
Yeah, we want to pass it to Axios get. So what do we replace?
That whatever comes after search.
Yeah, so everything after search can become query string. Yeah? Okay, and then we can just potentially just return this. And then we want to return our, I guess we can get rid of our parentheses and we just say this. We want to return data.businesses. Let's say return an empty object here when we don't get something back. So I'm just going to write this function out here. I'm just going to so it's like easy to test. So in the case of when an error occurs, we want to still like want our UI to work, right? Because it's expecting some data to come back when I call this function. So when some error occurs, we're like saying, okay, too bad. Ideally, we want to like indicate an error occurred. So maybe we want to like have an, instead of returning just an array, we want to return an object. We want to say something like error is true, message is Yelp API wrapped on me or something, right? And then in this case, instead of just returning an array, we want to return data. And then success is true. And then on the back end, I mean on the client side, when somebody makes a call, if the error property exists, that means that something bad has happened. So then the client can respond in that way and do something about the error. Either show like a message saying something bad happened, or handle the error in a graceful way rather than just assuming that, oh, Yelp did not find any results. Because what is the difference between if I were to return an empty array here? Let's say this is don't type code here. I'm just like having a conversation here. So instead of, let's say we were returning data, what is it, result.data.businesses. If you were doing this, right? So this is a perfectly normal thing to do, to return like the businesses. which is returning the array. But then if an error occurs, I'm returning an empty array. What is the flaw with doing this this approach? Now, what could be the problem? So, okay, so even before I ask that question, so what is the difference between the code going into line 22 and the code going into line 27? Like when would either of those cases be triggered?
They would both resolve. The promise, if it's a promise, wouldn't they both resolve rather than being rejected?
What do you mean?
Like, in the first, when we say return result data businesses, we may get empty array even in that case. Because
Exactly.
Nothing found for our request.
So, for example, so to answer your question, Jonathan, like or what you were saying, this is going to be triggered when it's a successful call to Yelp, right? You get back the result, and then you resolve the promise, and then you get the data out. So that's when a successful call to Yelp happens. But when an unsuccessful call to Yelp happens, when the promise is rejected, because let's say Yelp is down, this is going to get triggered. So that's when this is going to get triggered or this is going to get triggered. But now the problem is, when something bad happens, I'm returning an empty array, right? So that the client's like, oh, okay, Yelp didn't return anything. But then what is the difference between Yelp not returning anything because there were no restaurants found versus when there was an error occurred? Because in both cases, this would be an empty array because result.data.businesses would be empty if Yelp didn't find any restaurants. So now I have to have some way of differentiating between these two results. So what you ideally want to do is, like in the case of a success, you would want to like return more information about that it was a success. So you would specify something like success was true, and the data is the data. And then in the case of when something bad happens, instead of just returning an array, you would return like an object and say that the error was triggered, and then the message of like error, whatever the error. It could be like actually what I would want to say. So but ideally, this is what I want to say. I'm going to return back whatever the message that came back from the exception. Well, sometimes it could be like not Yelp. It could be like your server's network connection broke and it just couldn't like make a call. Yeah.
So if we're gonna put like error on one of them and success on the other, shouldn't it be consistent? So we say like error is false, and in this case error is true in this case, or we say success is true and success is false. We have consistent.
Yeah. So on the client side, so it depends, right? So how are you going to use it on the client side? So on the client side, I would just check to see if the error property exists. Technically, I don't even need to say success is true. Just indicating that error is true is good enough for me. Because if the error property exists on my object, my return object, that means the error has been triggered. Yeah, Deb?
Yeah, you gotta put the parentheses around that object.
It is there, it's just down on 23.
No, I'm talking about around the whole object.
Oh yeah.
Look at it as a function.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it'll look.
Yeah. At this point, then I would just do this. It'd probably be nicer.
So you can get it back.
Yeah.
It won't see it as an object. It'll see it as a function.
Thank you, Deb.
In the last.
Which one? Oh, yeah, this one. Cool.
I know.
What's that?
We're both having stomach growling.
Ah,
She said she started stomach
it's that time of the
growling,
day.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So, okay. Okay, so is that making sense now? Any questions about this so far?
Why we exporting like search?
I don't know, because ES5 may not have this. Because they're using ES5. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Yeah, it works. So you can just export search. Okay, so let's try and use this. So let's call search with some options. Let's call it with these two. Oops. Let's search for yoga in Oakland.
Okay, that same combo.
Yeah, I think it's okay. But let's get rid of it. And then we will do a dot then results. If I say dot then, just console dot log. Why do we need to do a dot then?
See the result. Because it's promise.
Because it's a promise. Because search returns a promise. What does search return? What is the search function returning? What's that?
Okay.
Promise that results.
Yeah, so it's returning a promise. So on line 19, that's what the function returns. Whatever is on line 22 and 26 are the return values of the function inside what is being passed to catch and what is being passed to then. These return values are not what the function search returns. Search essentially returns what is on line 19 because that return value is bound to that function here. So it's returning axios.get, and axios.get returns a promise. Okay, so cool. So we got some stuff. We got some yoga locations, people. Let's try. Okay, cool. Ume Yoga, the one right here. Cool. Found it. All right. So we have a way of interacting with our API. Okay, so now what do we need to do?
You import that file into the
Into where?
to your routes, right? Or
Mhm.
query from here.
Yeah, so now we need to export it on our own server's API. So we need to say const, we already have Yelp API here. So let's say app.use. Ideally, I would like to create a new file for this, but let's say, since we are short on time, let's say these are routes to access Yelp's API. Points. So app.use, I would say /Yelp/search. And this would be a request response. And then what do we want to do? Oh, it's app.get, yeah. The catch. What do we want to do though in our handler? So this is, think of it as like this request is coming in from the browser or from our React app. Our React app is going to be asking our backend server for some Yelp information. So what is the React app going to be sending us?
Request query param, so you
Mhm.
search your query params out of the
So we say
browser.
let params be request.query, right? And then what do we do? So this is an object, right? Params. So what do we do now? So these are all the parameters which we want to, which the front end is sending us. Things like location, term, which function.
Your Yelp API function.
Yeah, exactly. So we just call the search function with our params. Why? Because what was the input to search? What was the type of the input? There's an object.
You're just handling the promise on the client side.
No, we're going to do it here. Because we have to return a response back. Because we cannot return a promise, right? We have to return like an HTTP response. So what do we get back?
Then and it tries to do Stephen Brighter. Crazy.
Yeah.
Oh. Steven.
Why is this fair?
He will be with us forever. Okay, so what do we do with the results? What is results here? Is an object. So what do you want to do with the object? No, we just want to say response response.json results.
And it has to be response, right? Because you wrote it all the way on the top of response.
All right, I will change it to res. Yeah. Okay. So how do we test this? We will use the magic curl to do it. Localhost 3000/yelp/search, and then I want to say location equal to Oakland and term equal to Yoga. So we got the JSON response of our.
Was Yoga a restaurant picker, by the way?
I mean, we are just allowing to search by any category at this point. Yeah. If you want to get some herbal tea, you want
Some
to
macrobiotic food.
some spirulina smoothie.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like a wheat grass.
Okay.
Did you show that curl again?
Yeah, it's right over here. So curl is just a way to make like command line URL requests. So just literally whatever you type on the browser would be. So everyone did try this? Does it work? Does it? Cool. Okay, so now we have a way from the front for the front end to talk to our to at least get some Yelp requests going. So let's go back to our client side components. I forget where we were at. So our app. Did we have reducers in this? No. Okay, good. So we haven't decided on our, dang, we got rid of our cool diagram that I could do the other day. Okay, so we kind of have to think about our state of our application. So what are the different things that we're going to need to store in our application? So in our app, what do we need to store? Did we write it somewhere? I thought we did. Didn't we? No. What's that? Yeah, we did, right? Feels like this is a conversation we had. Okay, that's cool. Let's go over it. I'll go over it again. So what do we need to store? Okay, so we need to store a restaurant, maybe some details about the restaurant. So, but from the perspective of the app, I go onto the app. What is the first thing I see? Let's say there's no sign up. You just go in and so form to enter what? to search. So we need okay, so that's the search term. So we need a way to search for restaurants. Restaurants, so that the app can give us options, right? Okay, so that is just for the search. Then what happens? What's that? The button?
Yeah. Form.
Yeah. But then what would be the data which is changing on that page?
Changing in the URL, right?
Okay.
The URL has to get updated.
Let's just think of the data for now. Like what is the data that is changing from the apps, the app state? Like what do we need to what information do we need to be able to like show the details on the page? So the first step was entering what kinds of food do I need. Like I'm feeling super hungry, or like, you know, like I want to go to a super cheap place or whatever the details are, and you hit the submit button. From that point onwards, I need to go to the new page that it shows me a suggestion to say, do you want to go to this restaurant? So what information do I need at that point to be able to render that page? Okay, so that we're saving that. We already added that. What else do we need?
We're gonna need the location.
That's all part of the search details. So we have already figured out, we have gotten back a list of restaurants from Yelp because we made a call using the details that they gave us. Then what?
Then they go to the new page.
And what do we need? What do we need to show on the new page?
The new page needs to show a list of restaurants.
Do we show a list of the restaurants?
Oh no, this is a swiping, right?
Yeah.
This is the dating aspect.
Yeah.
It's one restaurant.
So we need to show a single restaurant
And then
on
there's
the
a no button.
page with a yes or no button. When user clicks on no, then what happens?
That restaurant needs to get saved into an array somewhere so that we can make sure they don't see it.
Okay, so move current restaurant to viewed or rejected restaurants, right? When user, oh, did you say something else? What else do we need to?
Once they say no, then that one goes up and then another one comes.
Okay, so when user clicks on yes, what happens?
It goes to a details page.
So move current restaurant to accepted restaurants. And move to restaurant detail page. Yeah, does this make sense? So if you look at our app, just by looking at what we just wrote, we need a way to store our rejected restaurants. So we need like a rejected restaurants as an empty array. Oops. We want to say accepted restaurants. We want to say current restaurant. Null in the beginning. Let's say empty object in the beginning. Right, so like, how did we get to this? Because we looked at our requirements and we looked at like how the app behaves and figured out what are the things that we need to store. And through that process, we figured out that this is the state that we need. Okay, what else do we need? There's something missing here.
Restaurants to be seen.
Restaurants to be seen. Okay, so like all restaurants, right? So the stuff that we get back from our search. So with an array of restaurants. Yeah? Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. Does anyone have questions?
When I tried the curl, it didn't get my term. It only got the location. Like, did yours show all? Yeah, because you see it's restaurants, not yoga.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then when I closed it, it returned the curl that I put in, but it only had location equal Oakland, not the and term right there.
Oh, that's so weird. I wonder. Request failed with status code.
It may be something to do with when we're passing in a request not query, and that's not an object, but the function that we wrote made query and an object.
So let's see. So let's go back to our server. Is it request.params.query? Maybe that's what it is. Query term is yoga. It's not getting out Oakland. That's interesting. Yeah, so it's only, maybe it's a thing with curl somehow. Let's try this from the browser. Oops. Okay, so that worked. So weird. Maybe because that is extremely weird. It's not query parameters. Yeah.
Did you put it in quotes? Because the ampersand has a special meaning.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
The ampersand has special meaning.
In the shell.
Yeah, that's
like,
true.
And so if you don't put it in quotes, it thinks that you're just you're asking it, the shell to execute that ampersand, which means put this job in the background. As a matter of fact, like if you scroll up, there's
oh, the plus sign, that probably means,
yeah, there's an indication that I was putting it in the background.
Yeah,
exactly.
So if I actually look at PS, I mean, we may have killed the command because there's no such thing as term yoga. But if I say ampersand node here, it would have probably started a node shell as 9831.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I do PS.
Or, no. They're all. You see the done there. Wait, scroll up. Let's see the done.
Yeah.
Piece here. So they finished. So
right. But I executed a node command, so it should have created a node shell, which is a persistent. So maybe 9831.
Type jobs. It's not there.
Right. Oh, I see. But so the one in the foreground happens first in the background. That's what it is. So, so it's like this. Cool. All right. It's 12 o'clock, so I got to stop. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.